Thanks for joining us. Legends and Losers is sponsored by our good friends at Oracle NetSuite. Check out netsuite.com/legends. Today, the incredible David Sachs of Craft Ventures. David is literally a Silicon Valley legend. He was on the founding team at PayPal. He's the founder and CEO of Yammer. He's an angel investor who invested in Facebook, AirBnB, and SpaceX, to name a few. And of course, he's worked very closely with other legendary entrepreneurs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, going back to the PayPal days. And what I would tell you, this may sound outrageous, but there are a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs and just people in general in Silicon Valley who would pay $10,000 to have a sit-down lunch and have this kind of conversation that you're now going to get to experience for free. We talk about what it takes to build multiple billion-dollar plus companies and categories, how to sell your company to Microsoft for over $1 billion, which is what happened in the case of Yammer, and how to tell the difference between a value prop and a product hook. All right. The Ramones said, hey ho, let's go. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Hello, my legendary friends. Thank you so much for investing part of your life with us here on Legends and Losers. If you're a longtime listener, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You're why we do this. And if you're new, welcome. One of our mantras around here from our name is you can't be a legend without being a loser. And so we try to unpack both sides of the coin and what it takes to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And one of the other things we try to do around here is hack some of the best minds from Silicon Valley and beyond and have a real dialogue about what it takes. And that's what we have today with the extraordinary David Sachs, really one of the all-time great entrepreneurs, and now he's having incredible success as an angel investor and now venture capitalist. I want to shout out to one of our listeners, Michelle Waite. She did a wonderful post on LinkedIn recently, and I wanted to read it to you. She said, quote, well, you did it again, Christopher Lochhead. You are like that non-PC, out-of-the-box brother-in-law who sometimes makes me cringe, but always seems to know exactly how to inspire me. I just finished listening to episode 150 of Legends and Losers with Magdalena Yesel and loved it. She goes on to say, getting to be a fly on the wall while you and she sat down for a real conversation about entrepreneurship, women in tech, category kings, and Silicon Valley investment was such a treat. Thank you. Well, Michelle, thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing the Magdalena episode on Legends and Losers. I really, really appreciate it. Now, before we get to David, it's grow time. And our friends at NetSuite want to help you master your growth. And they are really the platform for growth for small entrepreneurs, for startups. They can take you from the garage all the way to the IPO. And one of the interesting things I found about NetSuite is a lot of nonprofits use NetSuite. A while back, I was at Sweet World, their annual customer conference in beautiful Las Vegas, and saw the folks from alexslemonade.org. They are a national childhood cancer foundation, and they rely on NetSuite as well. So NetSuite is a business management application that handles every aspect in one easy-to-use cloud platform. With NetSuite, you can also run your business from your smartphone. Most entrepreneurs are out in the world, going on sales calls, meeting with people, building their ecosystems, recruiting out in the world. So imagine accessing all the critical information you need from your smartphone about your sales, where you are with orders, where things are with your cash flow, finance, accounting, and even HR. Thousands of the best brands in the world and fastest growing companies, frankly, in the world use NetSuite to manage their business, and now it's grow time for you. Go visit netsuite.com/legends, and what NetSuite is offering for Legends and Losers listeners is a 1-hour free growth review with a consultant in your industry. You can talk about barriers and opportunities, how you overcome them, brainstorm some new ideas, and obviously talk about how cloud technology might make a difference. So to turbocharge your growth, check out netsuite.com/legends. Now, David, I admire him tremendously. He's done amazing things in Silicon Valley. He's done some cool things in LA. Without any further ado, the incredible David Sachs.
We created a venture capital fund. And we've been investing. Actually, we've been investing since out of the fund since October last year. The first check that we wrote was for Bird, which has really taken off. That might be a fun one for us to talk about.
So Bird is flying.
Bird is flying. Yeah. It worked almost right away.
What is it? Why don't you tell me about it?
Well, it's a electric scooter sharing company where you open up an app on your phone and you can walk up to a scooter and unlock it, and you just scan the QR code on the scooter and then unlock it and you ride it. And it's really a solution to the problem of kind of that last mile transportation in cities. So most trips in cities are under 2 miles. And so, in the time that you could have waited for an Uber to come pick you up, you could just hop on a Bird and get there.
and probably more fun, right?
It is really fun. People are surprised by how much fun it is.
Because, what brand of scooter are they, or are they different types of scooters? Or you tell me.
Yeah, there's a number of different producers, but I think Bird spent some time trying to figure out like what the best one was, and I think they've kind of got the best, kind of heaviest duty one. I think one of the reasons why people underestimate this market, it's a classic example of a really transformative company that starts out looking like a toy. In this case, literally a toy. But these scooters are really different than the kids' toys. They're really a personal electric vehicle. That's been enabled by the battery revolution. Now we have batteries of sufficient power that we can, power short-range electric vehicles. And they just happen to look like the kids' toys because that's what's easiest to use. But this is really, I think, this is like kind of the other electric vehicle revolution.
Yeah, and
you've got Tesla and cars, but I think this is a whole new form factor. And
yeah,
sorry, I lost you there for a sec.
Yeah, I think Putin might be in our connection here. But I haven't been on an electric scooter, although I'm dying to try one. Of course, I've been on a Vespa a handful of times, and if you think about, there's a car on one end and there's a bike on the other. Sort of a scooter sort of is in between, obviously more bike-like, but they're really fun. There's something very liberating about scooting around, isn't there?
I think so. And there really is a kind of that middle ground between cars or ride sharing and then bikes. I mean, obviously the problem with the bike is that it's great exercise, but you don't necessarily want to work too hard to get where you're going before work or something like that. And so adding an electric, I think makes this feasible as a commuting option, as opposed to something that's just kind of like recreational.
Yeah. And so was that your first investment out of this fund, David?
Yeah, I guess it was the first investment. And since like 8 months later, we led the Series A, and 8 months later, I think it's the fastest growing unicorn in history. So it might all be downhill from here. I'm a little worried that we're never going to be able to, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to like capture lightning in a bottle like that, so perfectly again. But anyway, that was the first check we did, and then we've done a number of other things as well. We're very interested in crypto and the blockchain space. We've incubated a company called Harbor, which I think is doing really interesting things with tokenizing securities. And there've been some other ones too. We've invested in an esports company called Cloud9, a crypto company called BitGo. There's some other ones too, which I think are really interesting.
The esports space blows me away because it's nothing I could have ever imagined. And I was reading an article, I want to say maybe in Esquire, one of those sort of dude type magazines not long ago, about how much money the NBA is making on their new esports game. And I may be a little bit off, but if I'm not mistaken, they are viewing this as like a new execution of the NBA, and they're organizing tournaments and whatever they call it. And the NBA is now sponsoring, and I put it in air quotes, players to show up at these tournaments, and these players are making a tremendous amount of money. And, I don't know about you, but I mean, if you roll the clock back 10 or 15 years ago and you said to me, hey, the NBA will pay guys to play video games and like thousands of people are going to watch and it's going to be a very big focus, I would have said, you got to be out of your mind.
Yeah, it's the viewership is just staggering. So you're right. Esports started as essentially professional video game players. And so you think about something like Twitch, where people are broadcasting their video games. The next evolution was kind of the team sport version of that. And a lot of these esports are actually teams of players. 5 players are working together in a game against another team of players. And not only is the online audience huge, but I mean, they're now building like coliseums for live, events, and you've got live attendance. And just go to YouTube and like search for esports, and you will see like arenas are selling out. And I think if you kind of look at the millennial generation or younger who are the audience for this, I think the reason is like people eventually watch the professional sports that they grew up playing. And there's a lot more of us out there who play video games than we're very good at like Little League. I mean, frankly. So I think it's going to be very big, and it's global. And the audience is already, staggering. It's like, in the hundreds of millions and still growing very fast.
I don't know how you feel, David. The longer I've been alive, the more I like this experience, which is you hear about something, you go, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then it turns into something gigantic, and you see how wrong or I don't know how much of a lack of a visionary you are or were. And when I was younger, I think I would look at that and go, oh, I'm kind of stupid or whatever. And now I actually kind of like it. It's sort of like, oh, yeah, wow, that's kind of cool how wrong I was about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something there, which is a lot of the best ideas, especially like the best VC backed ideas they often sound a little bit ludicrous. You have to kind of fight your urge just to be very dismissive, and you got to stay open-minded. When Travis, who's the founder of Bird, he first told me the idea pre-launch at the seed stage, and I just thought it was like crazy. It's like, wait, you're going to just hook up these scooters, these devices that no one really has any familiarity with, and you're just going to hook them up to a mobile app, and you think people are just going to start using them. This is a vehicle that no one has even really seen before. I thought the idea was kind of crazy because it would require a whole shift in social norms. And then I went down a week before he launched and actually tried it. The experience was a lot more magical than I was expecting. And so I decided to invest, and it took off pretty much right away. And it's a great example of how quickly social norms can change now in this day and age. And that, it seems like when something now happens that's transformative, it just happens even faster than it ever did before. And so you have phenomena like whether it's esports or this electric scooter craze, it just sweeps through society so quickly now. There's so many viral channels for this stuff to take off.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And of course, no surprise to you, I think about it through a category design lens. Mm-hmm. And the sort of the thing that at a meta level that I think about is fundamentally category design is about teaching people to think about a problem and a solution in a completely different way. And on its face, you sort of think, well, most of us are resistant to big new change ideas. And yet, on the other hand, we're living at a time where there's more new technology, more new ideas that turn into businesses, that turn into categories, that turn into products, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's more new, if you will, behavioral change in, you pick your space than I would argue at any point in history. And so I guess that leads me to a question, David, which is how do you think about, a big new idea that fundamentally is predicated on a significant change in behavior for a significant number of people for this business to make any sense from a venture perspective? How do you think about that? And how do you think about picking the ones that you think are going to work versus the ones that won't?
Yeah, well, you and I think, are very simpatico on a lot of these ideas around category design, and then things like lightning strike type marketing events, getting your message out in like bold, in a bold way, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, as opposed to kind of getting it out in drips and drabs. And I think we implemented a lot of your ideas at Yammer. Back 10 years ago, and I think it worked out really well. So
and if I could interrupt you, David,
yeah.
politely, you implemented, you call them my ideas, that's kind of you, but you implemented those ideas at Yammer way better than we ever did at Jive. I was sitting there at the time watching you going, this is insane. I consider Jive a giant failure in my life. I couldn't get the company to execute, anywhere near the way I hoped. And obviously at Yammer, you guys executed, if I could call it this, you kick me under the table if you think this is unfair, but, the category design strategy, if you will, as close to flawlessly, I think, as a lot of enterprise startups can. And of course, I knew what there was to do. And I couldn't get at least from the seat I was in, I couldn't get the company to actually go play. And so I don't know where that quite leads me, but
well, I think, in fairness, so, we had this saying at Yammer that architecture is destiny. And so, Yammer was 10 years ago. Well, we founded the company about 10 years ago. It was founded as a viral freemium SaaS company. And, we were competing with you guys at Jive, but you guys were a little bit trapped by your architecture of, you started on-prem and eventually got to the cloud. But, doing architectural redesigns is, it's very hard. And so because we were cloud-based from the beginning, we could run a viral strategy. We could run, a much more consumerized sort of user experience. And so, but our category design, the way we did it, I think, out of a sense of necessity. So, the landscape 10 years ago, I'm sure you remember this, but for your audience, is that Jive
we don't have an audience, David.
Okay, fair enough.
This is a loser podcast.
Yeah.
It's you, me, and my mom.
Okay. So for the three people out there who are watching, the landscape was that actually when Yammer entered this space, the category was called social software in the workplace. Gartner had a Magic Quadrant. Jive and IBM won every year and had been in this space for, I don't know, at least 5 years winning. And our feeling was we could not win playing that game. We knew what the criteria were that Gartner had. They wanted us to do things like blogs and wikis and a bunch of other things that we didn't have time to do. And so we knew that if we were included in their quadrant, we would actually lose. And when they first excluded us because we didn't meet the requirements, at first we were kind of upset, but then we realized it was a good thing because there's no point being included and then losing. So what we did is we decided, well, look, we can't play the social software in the workplace game. Let's describe what we're doing in a different way. And so we called it enterprise social networking. And that was our category. And, what we were effectively doing was drafting off of what was happening in the consumer space, because at that time, Facebook was exploding, social networking was exploding. And we basically positioned ourselves as the sort of enterprise version of that. And within about 2 years, I think everyone in the space kind of migrated over to our definition. But we did it because we felt like we had to. If we used other people's definitions, we would lose.
Well, and I think you did a brilliant job. You did today what I would describe as a niche down. You did a few things incredibly well. Freemium in the enterprise space was still pretty new. So I'll tip my hat to you and say, I think you were a real pioneer there. You proved that it could work. At the time, of course, we tried to shit on you for doing it, but you were right. I was wrong.
Right.
And I think it's also a really valuable lesson. You taught me a lesson on this one. There's no question Jive, I think, was trying to, certainly in comparison to Yammer, boil the ocean. And I think from a product perspective, just my opinion, the company never figured out sort of what the superpower core set of functionality was. And you guys were genius about it. You did niche down. You said, we're only going to do this stuff, particularly in the beginning. You were incredibly smart not to be included. You say, oh, well, no, those guys are over here. We're over there. And as such, you know, we know how the movie ended. The movie ended a lot better for you than it ever did for Jive. I think the other thing, you know, Jive made a couple of mistakes. One, we threw one big lightning strike, and it really worked. And at the time, it felt like we had the industry on its heels. Like we were, to me, it felt like we were really, really close to having a massive breakthrough after that strike. And then we never fucking did anything again. And then engineering, to your point, knowing full well you had to get to the cloud, knowing full well you had to get to mobile, essentially took 2 years off. They couldn't get anything of consequence out the door. And that's a really bad thing when you have a competitor like Yammer who's executing incredibly well, who's niche down, very focused, pounding that drum. And then the other thing, of course, you did was you elected to go for an acquisition. And I think, in my opinion, Jive overplayed its hand. So I'm curious, that this leads me to a question. A, how did all that look from your seat? And then B, what made you decide ultimately to sell to Microsoft?
Yeah. So I think we did have an advantage because we could just focus. We were the SaaS, we were running a SaaS playbook, and at a time when when it wasn't even known. I mean, it wasn't. When I started Yammer, I didn't even know what SaaS was. Someone told me later that what we were doing was software as a service. We were just launching.
Sometimes it's good to be lucky, isn't it, David?
Well, it's lucky, and we also didn't know like the things you weren't supposed to do. So we didn't know that that it was you weren't supposed to go over the heads of the the corporate IT department and the CIO, and just go straight to the employees of a company and get them signed up for your product. And I mean, that was basically our strategy. And I remember at the time people started calling it blackmail, because what would happen is we go viral inside a company. And then we go to the IT department and say, well, do you want to control this? And our business model was to sell them the tools for administrative control. So people, some people got upset about that, but I think it worked really well for us. In terms of selling, we, after about 3.5 years, Microsoft came along, and they ultimately offered us $1.2 billion. Very kind of high quality acquirer. They don't go after a lot of companies, but when they do, they tend to make good offers. I mean, GitHub, they just announced a $7.5 billion acquisition of GitHub. So another example of that when Microsoft really wants something, I think they do a good job going after it. And so the opportunity was to be kind of a core part of their cloud and social strategy. In terms of thinking through it, I had dinner with Peter Thiel, and we discussed the offer and whether we should take it or not. And Peter kind of ran me through his framework. The first thing he asked me was, well, do you think you're a monopoly or a commodity? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure we're either one. And so but then we started going through but that was the framework. And so now if you've read, he published 0 to 1 several years later. So I think probably a lot more people know about it now, but I got the benefit of that thinking, years in advance. And so the question was Yammer, did it have sufficient dominance over its category that it could be considered a monopoly? And his view is that if you're not a monopoly, then you should sell. And if you are a monopoly, then you should never sell. And so that's kind of now the answer is we don't really know what would have happened, but it did feel like the space was becoming more competitive. We started off with this battle between Yammer and Jive, and then Salesforce got in. Salesforce got in with this Yammer clone called Chatter. And I think initially they really misplayed their hand by overcharging for the product. They were charging $15 per seat per month. We were charging $5. But I think that after a couple of years of kind of losing to us, they realized that maybe they should be giving this thing away for free as kind of as a way to spread virally inside the enterprise. And so it looked like the next phase of the competition was going to be Yammer against, maybe like a free Salesforce product, And it seemed like the market was about to get more competitive. If Microsoft didn't acquire us, it was pretty clear they were going to launch some kind of competitor. And so, you never know what the right thing to do is, but it did feel like things were getting much more competitive.
And remind me, David, how old was
Yeah.
Yammer when you sold to Microsoft?
It was about like 3.5 years after launch, a little under 4 years. But so was PayPal, by the way. PayPal, same thing, under 4 years. eBay bought it. I tend to think that like with these, especially if you have a viral model, these companies either work very quickly or not at all. Like you can see it right away. They either explode or they don't work. And there's no real kind of in between.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the real lessons for me as a VC is I just look for things that can explode. And I'd rather invest, I think, in something that hasn't launched yet than something that's, much more fully baked, but 3 months after launch just doesn't have any traction. Because I feel like you already know it's not going to be like one of those companies.
And I don't necessarily want to throw anybody under the bus, but if I think about companies of that vintage, yourselves, Box, Dropbox, sort of the early pioneers in sort of the direct to business user freemium SaaS model, if I can string all that together.
Yeah.
There was a company in that stage to amplify your point called Evernote.
Mm-hmm.
And it had some traction, and there was a point where it looked like it was doing that, but then it sort of, I don't know the exact numbers. I wasn't involved with the company, but you could sort of feel it take off, but then sort of shudder in the air and shake and stuff. And then that was the end of it. So I think there's a lot of credence in what you're saying with particularly those viral network-based kind of applications. Now I have a theory about what ended up happening in the enterprise social, business social area. And I want to, and feel free to kick it to shreds, because I've been dying to sort of kick this one around with you.
Okay.
My theory goes like this. The category for the most part was pioneered by yourselves, by Jive, a few others. And then all of those companies essentially went away. Microsoft buys you guys. In my opinion, Jive commits suicide. Lithium sort of does donuts in the parking lot, et cetera. And then out of nowhere, so that's what I think happens. So the whole category stalls. Yeah. But I have this theory, David, that says once the category sees the problem, they can't unsee it. Right. And if they agree with the problem, then they want the solution. And so here's my theory. Yourselves and Jive and others, but mostly yourselves and Jive, created, that is to say, designed the category. I think you did a much better job than we did. But everybody goes away, and all of a sudden, whether they realize it or not, Slack shows up and goes, hey, thanks for designing the category, guys. Right. You've seen the problem, ta-da, and in a way they run with it. And they are one of the very few category king companies that really had to do zero category design because a bunch of other people who went away did it for them. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that if Yammer had stayed independent, we would have, and then Slack had launched, we would have dropped everything and focused on that. And in fact, I think one of the last things I told people before leaving Yammer, this is like, we did the deal in mid 2012 and I left, in mid 2014. Slack had just started launching, and I kind of mentioned to people, really, you should take a very close look at this. But we would have dropped everything and focused on Slack. The thing that Slack did, Slack took a lot of the best elements of Yammer, the viral model, and they turbocharged it by getting mobile really dialed in. They were sort of not just kind of mobile first, because they had a great desktop app too, but mobile is really a first-class experience. The reality with Yammer is we still launched in the web age. And so we had mobile apps, but they were always a little bit of an afterthought. That was really something that I think we could have done a lot better. And the reason why mobile turbocharges the virality is the usage goes up a lot. You get a lot more daily actives. But also you can slurp in those mobile address books. And so the virality, if we had launched Yammer in the mobile age, I think our virality would have been we would have tuned that thing to be like probably 10 times greater. So, when
Well,
we
I
saw
would
the
argue, I hate to interrupt you on this one, but I
yeah.
would argue that the niche down, if I could call it that, functionality that you had, so a slice
Mhm.
of what at the time was considered
Yeah.
the functionality you needed, really would have lended itself even much more to mobile because of the small screen size
Yes.
and the form factor.
Yes.
And so I couldn't agree with you more. The mobile era would have turbocharged your growth in a way that,
Right.
otherwise wouldn't have, right? Or otherwise didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think in hindsight, that is something we could have done differently or better is, I think, we felt a lot of the same pressure you guys probably did at Jive, which is, when you're selling into the enterprise, they just keep wanting you to expand the checklist of features that they want. And so you keep getting pushed into becoming more and more of a suite as opposed to kind of more of the type of product you're talking about, the niche, the sort of point solution. Um, and if you don't kind of broaden your offering, you lose in the sales bake off to somebody who has. And so, but I think mobile really changed that equation because you just can't use that many features in the mobile interface anyway. So it made much more that point solution strategy just much more feasible. So yeah, look, I think if we had to do it all over again, if the Microsoft deal hadn't happened, I mean, the thing we would have done and should have done earlier, I think, was just like go all in on mobile. And it wasn't that we ignored mobile, but it was like one of 5 things we were working on. We had like 5 product teams, and mobile was one of them. And in hindsight, what we should have done was just tell the whole company, we're not doing anything else until you get mobile right. And we should have like just said, this can't be one of 5 things. This is the only thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Now,
Yeah.
I'm also curious when a ginormo company like Microsoft shows up to a fast growing startup who's obviously a fraction of their size, the acquisition dance, if I can call it that, it can be tremendously consuming for you as the CEO, for the executive team. It can take what in startup time feels like a long time. It can take in startup resources what feels like a lot of resources. And of course, even if they sell an LOI, even if they give you an LOI, there's no guarantee this thing's going to happen.
Right.
Even if there's a big breakup fee, they're Microsoft, it doesn't matter. And so I guess my question for you, David, is at that time, or maybe even in general, how do you think about how a startup CEO, founder should navigate, on one hand, doing the dance and trying to maybe sell the company, but at the same time knowing full well this might not happen. They might be fucking with us. They might just be trying to pick our brain. They might toy with us for 6 months and take our eye off the ball.
Right.
And I'm not saying they were, and I don't want to say anything bad about Microsoft. I think they're an amazing company. But as a small company, dancing with a giant partner like this can be dangerous and can be damaging to the business because you are seriously distracted by this as well as many others. So how do you think about that?
I think you're exactly right. There are a few things more dangerous for a startup than going through an M&A process that for some reason doesn't happen. And most of them don't actually happen. So kind of pre-deal or pre-LOI, like you said, it's a distraction. I mean, because these things really take up the CEO's time. It's not taking up, well, in our case, it was Ballmer or Satya. It's not taking up their time. They've got whole departments of people who can pursue these things. And so, it is very time consuming. And then, if you sign some sort of term sheet and it leaks to the company, in my experience, and I saw this with PayPal too, the second that people think the company's getting acquired, everyone just stops working. They just want to find out like what's happening, and so everyone just starts buzzing. And it's really hard to get people back to work until you can make some sort of definitive announcement about like what's happening and what it means for their future. And that can take months. And there's nothing, I think, more damaging for a startup than I think an M&A process or deal that actually doesn't go anywhere. And so, in terms of how to deal with it, I think one thing that can be helpful is to get a deal advisor. So, I had a couple of these, false starts, and actually, I had a couple of earlier conversations with Microsoft, and we didn't get very far in the process, but I felt it like it was becoming a distraction. And so when they finally called to tell me they had a term sheet, I almost like didn't really believe them, and I just said, "Listen, go talk to Catalyst, Frank Quattrone's firm, because I basically went to Catalyst and said, listen, I'm starting to get this inbound interest. We did nothing to shop the company, but people were coming to us. And I was like, it's becoming a distraction. I don't have time for it. Can you guys just manage it for us? And so when Microsoft came back to me, I said, listen, just go talk to Catalyst. And so that was helpful because it reduced the distraction. I think it made them get more serious because they knew, like, okay, if Catalyst is running this process, there might be other suitors. I don't know. And I think it was helpful for me because I had kind of an interlocutor who could help me interpret what was happening. And, different acquirers speak in different ways. So like Microsoft, I think as an acquirer, doesn't proffer many term sheets. If you get a term sheet from them, the odds are pretty good that they intend to do the deal. There are other large companies that, drop term sheets and close on a very small percentage of them. And I think they use the M&A process to learn about a space, and them giving you a term sheet, frankly, doesn't mean anything. And so, a good deal advisor will know those kinds of things and can tell you what's really happening.
Yeah, and so you think Catalyst / Quattrone, and maybe was Boutros involved as well?
Yeah, so it was Brian Kane. It's basically was their SaaS practice.
Yeah.
He's still there, and Ian McLeod, who's I think moved on to do other things, but Brian is still there. They were super helpful, I think.
So good deal advisors, and in this case, deal advisors with a big reputation, experience selling companies to Microsoft over a couple decades. I mean, you brought in literally the A team to help you with this.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because it's just, they make you more disciplined in your process and your communications. They help you interpret what's happening on the other side. And I think they, they actually help you reduce the distraction because they can help you run a proper process. The most important thing, in my view, is so from the startup standpoint, there's really only, in my experience, deals either happen quickly or not at all. So I think you have to either you need to push for a quick deal or for no deal. But the thing that's really the killer is a long, drawn out process. So as a startup, you really have to kind of insist on a quick process, or don't do the deal, but just don't get drawn into a long process.
Yeah, and look, I don't fancy myself an M&A expert, but on the other hand, it would take me a long time to try to figure out how many transactions I've been involved with on either side. And what I've noticed, I'm curious if you've had the same experience to the point on it's got to sort of happen quickly or it's not.
Right.
These sorts of deals take on a life, and you can almost sort of have a sixth sense about where this thing is in its life and how much enthusiasm on either side there is. And then if you sort of pay attention to that spider sense, you can sort of feel when that enthusiasm sort of wanes and it's just turning into some kind of horrible, proctology exam. Is that been your experience, or what's been your experience?
Well, in any deal, you can just do an infinite amount of diligence. I mean, there's just there's no point at which, you're ever kind of done if somebody wants to keep doing it. And so you've really got to understand before you go into the process, you need to ask all of these process questions. It's not just about like, what's the number? It's also, what is your process for closing? Like, what's your diligence checklist going to be? It may not be a process you want to engage in. Even if the number is something that looks attractive, if the odds of closing are low and the process is too drawn out, it may not be something you want to do. So you do have, I think it's as a startup, as the target company, you have to be really sensitive to this. I think the acquirer has a lot more, they can afford the distraction a lot more than you can. So I think you have to establish up front, what is the timetable? What's on your diligence checklist? And in my experience, all the good deals I've ever done in my life, not just selling companies, but also just investing in them, they're always quick. It's always the deals that like take too long that, that turn out to be the bad deals and you always regret doing them. So again, I think, good deals happen quick or not at all. And I think you should hold acquirers to that. So if you believe in that, and that's been my experience, that's the thing you should convey to the acquirer is like, look, good deals happen quick or not at all. Are you in the first camp or the second. I mean, those should be their choices, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm curious, just, do you feel the same way about venture deals, or do you look at them differently, or how do you think about venture deals versus acquisition deals?
I do. I mean, I think, different type of deal, but yeah, I think it's generally true. I think the best deals happen quickly. There's a saying in poker, you think long, you think wrong, that's probably true in venture too. I kind of follow my sense of excitement when I'm investing. Like, it's not something like for me, it's not like a super analytical process. The founder tells me their vision, shows me their product, look at the numbers of the traction, and I either get excited or I don't. I almost call it like, it's like a form of like empathy, but it's not like emotional empathy. It's more like vision empathy. I either get excited by and like identify with that founder's like vision and passion for what they're doing, and I share a small piece of that excitement, or I don't. And if I do, then I know I want to do the deal right away. And if I don't, then I don't. And trying to overanalyze things doesn't generally. You rarely learn something that can sort of talk you into a deal. Like there's the overanalysis process doesn't, like, it can't really help you manufacture excitement. That's not there.
That's interesting because, I feel like I know you, but we don't hang out every weekend and do stuff. My impression of you is that you're a fairly thoughtful, reasonably analytical guy. So so is that true? And if that's true, that makes your comment even more interesting.
Well, I think so. I think my process on this stuff is, entrepreneur shares what they're doing, and I either get excited or I don't. And then if I do, then we do some diligence and we try to keep it brief. And at that point, you can kind of knock out a deal. You can learn something that the worst thing you could ever learn is that something that the founder told you wasn't true, or that just something about the business isn't what you thought it was. And so I have learned that you obviously have to do some diligence, but we try to keep it quick. And that diligence process is usually about kind of excluding something that initially gets us excited. But the diligence process isn't going to manufacture excitement if it wasn't there to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been very true in my experience as well. Now, I'm curious, David, you have been involved with two of the most legendary successes of the last, 15 years or so. Obviously, PayPal and Yammer. And a bunch of others. If we have time, I'd love to talk about what you've done, some of the things you've done in Hollywood and movie making and that stuff. But if we go to PayPal and Yammer, what are your big learnings as you sort of reflect on building two hyper-growth, super highly valued companies that both had, extraordinary outcomes?
Well, I think there's probably two things. And this is now what I kind of look for as an investor, is what I'm looking for. And what I think founders should really think about is, number one, do you have a product hook? And by product hook, I mean a simple, repeatable transaction or flow or behavior in your product that is the sort of atomic unit of the product. It's the search box for Google. It's the tweet or the status update for Twitter. It's friending on Facebook. For Yammer, it was posting, what are you doing? What are you working on inside the company? For PayPal, it was just being able to enter someone's email address and send them money. I think if you don't have that simple behavior that's at the core of your product, layering on a bunch of complexity won't help you, because users will graduate up to complexity once they're initially engaged with the product, but just giving them a product with a lot more surface area, that doesn't typically help. So the first thing I want to understand is, what is your product hook? Just like the same way that a song needs that, that sort of musical, there's that simple, repeatable chorus or whatever it is.
Yeah. And if you don't have the "She Loves You," yeah, it's not on the radio or on Spotify or Pandora, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I see an electric guitar hanging behind you, so you know more about the stuff than I do. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have, just like in music, you've got to have that hook to the song. I think the same is true with product. So number one is like, what is the product hook? Number two is, what is your distribution trick? What is the thing that's going to give you, that's going to hopefully make you explode? What is the thing that's going to enable you to grow at, rates that are, super normal, like way above average? And, the hard thing about distribution is that all the distribution channels are crowded, right? There's just so many people going after, whether it's enterprise sales or buying Google AdWords or now Facebook advertising or whatever the channel is, all those things are crowded. That makes them expensive, which means that if you as a company are only going to do those kinds of things, you are not going to grow at, an explosive rate or even probably an above average rate. So I always want to know, what is a distribution trick? And so the really great companies innovate on distribution, not just product. So with PayPal, we had a whole bunch of tricks. The first trick was the product was viral. You could email money to somebody who didn't have a PayPal account. The second, and this was probably the biggest trick, is that we bootstrapped off the eBay platform. So we basically went viral on eBay, and then we did a whole bunch of things like embed PayPal logos on eBay auctions to accelerate that. That would be PayPal. The PayPal example with Yammer, we introduced virality into the enterprise. Like we talked about, we didn't go to the IT department. We just allowed users to sign up, and I mean the same thing Slack is doing today. Now, I think going viral in the enterprise today would be a much harder proposition because a lot of people have tried it, and so therefore the channel is a little bit more burned out. But 10 years ago, that was like a really novel idea to take consumer virality and apply it to an enterprise product. And there's other examples. With Bird, our thesis when we invested in Bird was real world virality, that people in the real world would see these birds like whizzing by and go, "Whoa, what is that?" And then walk up to one on the sidewalk and scan the QR code because they're curious. And so the thing, if it worked, could be explosive because of this, because, each user would effectively, recruit another user indirectly through this real world.
Out of curiosity in the real world, you see, my friend John Bielenberg, the legendary designer, he calls it looking for the quote unquote dog with a hat, right? If you and I are walking down the street, there's 1,000 things we don't notice that are normal, people walking, right, cars, whatever it is. But if there's a dog with a hat, John's theory is one of us is going to say, "Hey, check out the dog with the hat." And so in John's vernacular, a bird is kind of like a dog with a hat. It's like, well, and what is that, right? Yeah. And the QR code is genius, right? Because I can answer the question, what is that, by clicking on that, and then I assume something great happens when I do that.
Totally. Well, the product hook is you just walk up to the bird and you just scan the QR code with your phone, and boom, and then you click ride or unlock, and you're off to the races. You can go somewhere. And so that product hook, that simple, repeatable transaction, is just very elegant. And that was a thing that when I first tried it, I found it to be very magical, and it immediately got me excited. But then it's also kind of, it's combined with this viral element, and the dog with the hat. I think that's right. I think it's a big advantage over bike sharing, because you see a bike going by on the street, you don't even notice or care. And the fact that it was provided by a bike sharing company, okay, so what? There was something, because no one's really seen these birds before. When they go by, I saw this in the first 2 weeks. It created a sensation. People were like, "What is that?" And so, the product hook and the distribution trick were intrinsically related. And that's another thing you find of the best companies, is that they, they're thinking about product and distribution, but it's not like the distribution is just kind of bolted on. It's, they've really figured out how to make it seamless. So I think another great example, one you mentioned, is Dropbox. Dropbox, just simple cloud storage, perfect timing. Mobile's taking off. You need to get, a file across your devices. But then the really brilliant thing was giving you free storage space for recruiting your friends. And it was just like the PayPal sign up and referral bonuses, but even better because the storage didn't really cost. It had a high perceived value, but it didn't cost them very much. So, I mean, that's another great example of combining product hook with distribution trick and just getting an explosion.
I love that insight. The distribution trick insight, I think, is a big one. And I think you are, I'll tip my hat to you again on this one. You are one of the best at figuring out that small niche down, if you will, product hook.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't do 47 things. It's just one thing. And we're going to bet the farm on that this is the thing that's going to grab people.
Yeah, I mean, I had the idea for a corporate social network for at least 6 months before I started working on, for really a year before, but I didn't know what the product hook was. And it wasn't until Twitter launched in mid-July 2007 that it occurred to me, wait, we could just take that simple atomic status update and we can make that the center of the product. Because, I didn't think corporate profiles would be good enough. Like, you might come to Yammer once, and I guess it wasn't called Yammer back then, but you might come to this corporate social network, it's time for a profile, but then you wouldn't do anything again. And so I was kind of looking for what could be that simple, repeatable behavior. And then Twitter launched. I'm like, that's it. Let's make it a work update as opposed to kind of a personal update. And that was the thing that enabled us to kind of ground the product. So, yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of looking for what is that simple on-ramp? What is that way you're going to get a user on board? And I think a lot of founders kind of miss this because they think that they just think in terms of value prop. There's a big difference between a value prop and a product hook. It's easy to come up with value props. It's hard to come up with product hooks. And the difference is that, without the product hook, nobody engages with your product to discover the value prop. So, that's something I think, a lot of founders kind of miss is they think that, hey, I've just discovered this value prop. That doesn't actually give you a product.
That's a big insight, David. That's a very big insight. Now, I'm also curious, and you kick me under the table if you don't want to talk about this much, but
Right.
How do you think about your Zenefits experience today in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, that was an example of an explosive company that, kind of went off the rails. And I think, I have a $12 million investment in that. So I learned, 12 million, I guess the lesson there probably is worth about 12 million bucks because I just learned all these different ways that an explosive company can kind of go off the rails and how you want to prevent that. So it's a very useful, I think, corollary to kind of my theory of, look, I'm not going to change my fundamental view that what we should be looking for as investors are explosive companies, and here's how you design those explosive companies. But I think, we learn a whole bunch of useful things about, how to make sure that once they do explode, they don't like implode or go off the rails.
We want the company to explode and
Right.
not implode as it explodes.
Right. Explode in a good way, not in a bad way. Yeah.
Yeah, we invented a word around here, because obviously the mantra, you can't be a legend without being a loser. And of course, we learn so much from the losing, so often more, but it hurts like hell, right? And so we try to invent this word to make it feel like it's more fun than it is. We call it losery, that there's going to be some losery along the way.
Right. Well, hopefully, we've got a great CEO and a great team at Zenefits. And so, hopefully the company will still be successful. I think they're on a good path now. We solved all those problems, but, it involved a lot more pain than I think there needed to be. And, I think some of the big lessons there, obviously on compliance, it's such a no-brainer, like don't try and hack compliance. It's just that's not one of the things that you kind of take shortcuts on. So that was just like this mind-bogglingly stupid thing. But I think there's also lessons embedded in there about you want to grow as fast as you can, but not faster. You got to make sure that as you're scaling, I think this is especially true with like SaaS companies or business software companies, you got to pay really religious attention to your NPS, your customer satisfaction. And even if you can scale faster, like physically, just don't scale faster than if you're sacrificing NPS, don't do it. So that, make sure that MPS is a growth constraint on how fast you scale. I think if like the company had done that and actually slowed down a little bit, gotten compliance right, just try to grow a little slower, but making customers happy along the way, I think it would have avoided a lot of pain down the road.
It turns out there is something to paying attention to making customers happy that makes a difference.
Well, it sounds kind of obvious, but there is a lot of pressure on founders to grow and to grow really fast, because that VCs obviously reward that. But I think the areas you got to be really careful is you don't want to grow at the expense of MPS. You also don't want to grow at the expense of gross margins. So it's really easy to grow by selling dollars for 90 cents, but that would give you negative gross margins. You got to be really careful that you're not getting into negative or low gross margin territory, and that you're effectively expanding by subsidizing the market. That's not a good place to be.
It's interesting. This is just a bit of a side note, but I don't do too much of the kind of advisory consulting stuff that I used to do, but I do a smidgen. And so last year I got involved with a couple of companies, and one in particular, I probably not appropriate to name, but I've known the CEO founder for quite some time. We've had some success together in the past. He's a very savvy, experienced guy. The company's doing incredibly well. And to your point, he decided that they were going to take this last quarter off from a sales perspective, because he could feel the thing shaking. It's still fairly early. The product is still pretty immature. I don't know if they consider it beta or production, but wherever it is, it's very early. It's not quote unquote hardened.
Right.
And while they're dealing with inbound leads, they're not like pounding the sales thing, because he's like, listen, we need to get, I forget how many customers we've got, but it's a handful. We need to get these customers right. We need to lock and load this product. We need to solidify it a little bit. And we're going to dial back on this sort of grow thing until we can feel like we can service these customers. And we think that's about a quarter. And so we're just going to essentially take a quarter off from selling. And, you don't hear that much around Silicon Valley, do you?
No, I think so. The only problem I see with that. So first of all, I like where he's coming from, which is, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's make sure that customer success is at the heart of what we do, not try to just grow. I think the hard part about that from an organizational standpoint is what you do with your sales team. Do you give them a quarter off? So what you're trying to, I think, build, especially with these SaaS companies, is a machine. Something that keeps compounding. And you look at Salesforce, which has just been the most successful company in the space, and it just seemed like this machine that just quarter after quarter keeps shipping code, keeps doing successful events and conferences, keeps having new interesting lightning strike type marketing messages, and keeps expanding their number of salespeople and territories. So I think and that idea of just getting in this cadence of just synchronizing marketing, product, and sales, and just relentlessly shipping quarter after quarter, I think that to me is the ideal. I mean, I think that's better than doing a start and stop type, because I think from an organizational standpoint, it's better. Yeah.
Now, I got to ask you a little bit on the personal side as well, David. And again, kick me under the table, so to speak, if I get too personal with you. But knowing you as I do, and just looking at your background track record, if I think about a lot of the entrepreneurial books, a lot of the entrepreneur porn that's out there today, and a lot of it's about making it, and you think about Silicon Valley, and we come here and we do this and we do that, and I mean, by any measure, you're a guy that has made it and then some. You've had the magic careers, I think, in modern Silicon Valley, if not ever. And a lot of people sort of have there's this sort of carrot that's at the end of a lot of these discussions or books or websites or podcasts or whatever, that, you're going to get to some magic place and you're going to make some magic amount of money and achieve all the accolades and all the things that you've achieved and then some. And then you're just going to ride off and move to Maui or the Caymans, and then you're going to just summer in France and you're going to drink Chateau Neuf Ding Dong and sort of disappear into the sunset with, a supermodel or whatever it is. And clearly that's not what you did. You're a multi-time, ginormously successful entrepreneur, and you decided not to do that, but to become a venture capitalist and now try to help others do it over and over again. And so all that leads me to a question, which is, as a guy who clearly, quote unquote, made it and then some, why are you and I talking? Why aren't you in, some magical place running around with supermodels or doing whatever it is these people think you should do after you've made it?
Well, I think Elon was asked this question. He just said, beaches are really boring, and there is some truth to this. That I don't find vacations very stimulating. I mean, there is something really fun and intellectually stimulating about, like, if you think about like startups and what we're doing, this is kind of like the most fun game that you can play. So it is fun for me, and I think I'm probably having more fun in the current job that I'm doing now than I've had really in a long time, because I get to be part of these exciting, fast-growing companies, but frankly, the stress of running them and making them work, that's not on me. It's on the entrepreneur, and I'm just there as an advisor and help. So it's a lot of fun. I think it's just a fun thing to do, and I think it's just more fun than sitting on a beach somewhere.
Yeah. It's funny. I found the same thing, after Play Bigger, the book came out, which now is almost 2 years ago. Yeah. 2 years almost to the day. I retired from the company. I took 6 months off, and I said I was retired, and I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I was, doing a lot of surfing, hanging out with my family, doing the kinds of things that you do. But after 6 months of that, it was sort of the second or third time I tried to retire, depending on how you want to count it. It's
Right.
just like, yeah, well, whether I like to admit it or not, I'm not Kelly fucking Slater, right? So as much as I love to surf,
Right.
that's not what I'm best at. This business thing, for better or for worse, is. And so it is sort of weird. It's sort of like when Michael Jordan goes to play baseball, you're like, what? Right? Is that
Yeah.
sort of how it was for you? It's like, hey, this is kind of who I am, and it's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I lack the creativity to figure out new things to do with my life, but but no, I mean, I like what I'm doing, and I think you get, as an entrepreneur, I think every time I would sell a company as an entrepreneur, I would like swear to myself that I'm never doing that again, because it's so hard, it's so stressful. And then what happens is, like you said, 6 months goes by, you get an idea in your head and you can't get it out of your head. And the only way to get it out of your head is to actually implement it. And I want to see that product. I want to see if I'm right about this product idea I've got in my head. So you end up creating another company, and then you sign up for all the stress again. But I would say, so, that historically has been my pattern. But I think, one of the things I really like about what I'm doing with Craft is that it's a platform where, I had an idea for this company, Harbor, which is creating tokenized securities on the blockchain. And rather than doing it all myself as CEO, I took a chairman role and I brought the team together. And so I brought together a fantastic team of executives that I'd worked with before at Yammer and Zenefits. And so, I'm still involved as chairman. I'm on the board. I help with strategy and product, but they do the day-to-day operations. And I kind of reached a point in my career where that's just kind of like the perfect balance.
Yeah. And again, if this is too personal, you tell me, David, did becoming a dad sort of have anything to do with sort of this shift in, if you will, being the guy, being the CEO or senior executive as you were at PayPal, or were the two things not connected?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if anyone's tried to connect them before, but you're right. I've got 3 kids, and I had my first when I was in the midst of doing Yammer. I would say that, like, as you get older, I think that your interests tend to get a little broader. It includes family and other things. I think that, when I was younger, and I think this is true of just a lot of entrepreneurs, you have to be kind of obsessively focused on your company and what you're doing. I tend to think those are the entrepreneurs who are most successful. I heard, I remember Bill Gates told a story about like a similar idea when he was like a lunatic in this regard. In his 20s, I mean, he would go out to the parking lot of Microsoft, and he knew everyone's license plates, and he'd go out there at night to see who was still working. I mean, and I do tend to think that, for better or worse, I'm not saying like that lack of balance is healthy, but I do tend to think that the best entrepreneurs just obsessively focus on what they're doing. I think that as you get older, it's harder to have that kind of obsessive focus. And I do think that's one of the reasons why I actually like what I'm doing now, where I'm an investor and I'm not kind of just stuck kind of doing one thing.
Yeah. Now, David, I want to be super respectful of your time. I know you got a lot of companies, categories, and empires to go build. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's been really fun. So, well, thank you. I feel like there's been a few blog posts I've been intending to write forever, and I feel like we've kind of gotten them out. This has been great I feel like you've helped me kind of crystallize a lot of the things that, that we're doing here and that, we're working on. So it's been super fun.
Well, great, and we can get a transcript of our conversation today. So if you want to convert some of those into some blog posts, you'll at least have a good start.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
The other thing I would say to you, David, is, by the way, I think you should start a podcast. I think you're one of those really super smart guys that if you did something every week or every other week, I think a lot of people would be interested. And that said, until you do, or whether you do or not, I would like you to think of Legends and Losers as your podcast. And so when you have other sort of, if you will, blog posts in your head that you just want to talk to, hopefully a friendly voice about on the other end, I absolutely welcome you back. I'm very curious to dig into your thoughts about blockchain and a whole bunch of these other things in some more detail over time. So you're welcome back. And if you wake up tomorrow morning and go, oh shit, we should have talked about these 3 things, email me and come back and we'll do part 2.
Yeah, I'll come back. Yeah,
all right,
let's
David.
do it. Well, we should do it every quarter. All right, thanks, Chris.
You're in once a quarter. Let's do it.
Okay, sounds good. Awesome.
Thank you, brother. Right. Be legendary, as I know you will.
All right, thank you. All right, talk to you later.
Right. Whew. I told you some people would easily pay $10,000 for that conversation with David. If you know someone who would like to save the $10,000, why don't email this podcast episode right now? And we would love you just a little bit extra if you shared this episode with David Sachs on social media. Now, Heather Clancy and I have a new book coming out called Niche Down, and we would love you to be part of the launch. So if you would like to be part of our street team and help us launch Niche Down, here's what we'd ask you to do. We want to give you chapter 1 for free. So send us an email at blackhole@legendsandlosers.com, blackhole, all one word, legendsandlosers.com. Subject Niche Down, and we will email you the first chapter of our new book. And in exchange, we just ask you to help us get the word out. Be kind enough to write us an Amazon review. Niche Down comes out in mid-July, and just generally be sweet to us as we get our niche on. The other thing I want to point you to, Heather and I have been doing some writing for a awesome new internet property for entrepreneurs called growwire.com. It's what legendary entrepreneurs are reading. We're posting new content there on a regular basis, so check out growwire.com. All right. We would like to thank the official sock provider to Legends and Losers, John's Crazy Socks, spreading happiness at johnscrazysocks.com. Check them out. Equity Directory, the invite-only network for entrepreneurs and startup talent exchanging work for equity at equitydirectory.com. HarperCollins Instant Classic Play Bigger, how pirates, dreamers, and innovators create and dominate markets. Our good friends at One Life Fully Lived, dream, plan, and live your best life. We're a nonprofit trying to make a difference for you and everyone else for that matter. Check us out at onelifefullylived.org. Our good friends at Positive Marketing in the Excited Kingdom. PR, marketing, category design in London, Europe, and beyond. Check out positivemarketing.com. Verve Coffee Roasters, the official coffee roasters of Legends and Losers, creating California craft coffee like no one else. Check them out at vervecoffee.com. My dear friend and multiple-time guest on this podcast, Dushka Zapata, and her amazing book, How to Be Ferociously Happy, and other essays. The good folks at secondflightconsultancy.com. This is Nick Cullen's business. He's one of the greatest growth hackers in the world. He's been my partner on our new podcast, 6 Minutes of Legendary. Check it out wherever you get podcasts. It's a whole new audio experience. And if you want to growth hack your business to new heights, check out secondflightconsultancy.com. Stop Riding the Pine. Speaking of podcasts, one of my favorite podcasts with the nicest man in podcasting, Jamie Jane. Check out Stop Riding the Pine. And Rapid Media, legendary marketing and media communications and planning in beautiful Australia at rapidmedia.com.au. And the incredible people at kiva.org. Microloans in the developing world. Check them out if you want to make a difference. This is one of the most powerful things you can do. kiva.org. All right. We would like to remind you that today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes, and this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network. And we would love you just a little bit extra if you shared the shit out of it. All rights do remain disturbed. This oddcast is not recommended for wankers and is sometimes highly flammable. Remember to be nice to your mother, support your local venture capitalist, buy John's crazy socks, be a podcast legend. Tell 2 people you love about 2 podcasts you love and help them get set up on their smartphone. Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane. Listen to the Tragically Hip. Chewing out a rhythm on my bubble gum. The sun is out and I want some. Only buy pasture-raised, free-range eggs. Thank you, Dandy Candy. I love you, Mom and Dad. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Marcus Rust, CEO of Rose Acre Farms. Sorry, Marcus. We just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for investing part of your life, and we look forward to seeing you again here on Legends and Losers.